Okay, Laura, thanks for joining us on the Creative Leaders podcast. As always, just going to ask you to give us your origin story, tell us a little bit about your background and your journey through the animation industry and take us up to where you are today.
Sure. Well, it might pass a little bit wiggly. I think a lot of producers' journeys kind of maybe are. I started out, actually, originally when I went to university, I started doing a business degree, which really wasn't for me. I think it was a bit like going into an episode of The Apprentice every day, and it was a bit uptight and not really a lot of fun. But I'd originally thought that I wanted to be doing something around enterprise or business because that really interested me. And I think that deep down, I always had this creative side to me that I wanted to explore. And I thought about going to art school and things like that, but I was a little bit worried about maybe not getting a job at the end of it. And I think you're really susceptible to all that narrative when you're young of like, you pick a really stable, secure career. But like I say, the business thing wasn't really my cup of tea. And I went back and did media and film and communications. And I found really quickly at university that it kind of married maybe some of that entrepreneurial, businessy kind of stuff with essentially being a producer, production, managing budgets and planning and being super organized and finding ways to cast things and bring creative projects together and working with people, but also having a creative outlet. So I was kind of lucky in that. I think when I went to university for the second time, I actually really liked what I did, and I spent that whole time at uni also doing these kind of extracurricular things. So I ended up working in music and doing bands and gig repping with a company that I really liked here in Glasgow. And then outside of that, I ended up working on a radio show and kind of helping co-present and produce it and finding interviewees and doing all the research and all that kind of stuff. And I think the whole time I was always kind of being a producer in some capacity. So when I left university, I had quite a few contacts and I was really lucky in that respect. But I didn't really find that there was a lot kind of going on in Glasgow at that time. And that's obviously where I'm from originally. It was quite hard to get a job in the creative industries back then. And I was quite up for trying different things. I went to work for a social enterprise, which was based in the south of Glasgow, and it was working with people from impoverished communities, trying to get them involved in the creative industries, giving them skills in media creation, whether that's working on the camera side of things or sound editing. And that was really interesting. I actually really loved it because it really gave me those skills of trying to navigate groups and communities that maybe wouldn't naturally be involved in that sector. So I learned a lot doing that, and I did it for a couple of years, which was really fulfilling. But I decided that I wanted to go agency side, which was a bit of a total segue because agencies are completely different from being on the production side. But that was great. I ended up working with a company called Made Brave. They were quite new. They're based in Glasgow. And at that time, I think I was employee number 5. And they were really ambitious and they really wanted to make a name for themselves in Scotland and beyond, but have touch points across all different types of media. And they'd never done film or animation before. And I had a background in film. And we ended up getting an animation client, and I'd never done it before. I mean, I thought, well, I can produce live action. I'll give it a bash. And to any live action producers listening, it is really, really different. Don't think it's an easy thing to just like segue into animation. It's a totally different beast, but it was great because it was a young agency that was willing to take risks, and we were learning together. I think I worked with you on that project. You were the sound studio that I called up. I think I just found you on Google back then, and that was my first animation project. And it went well, and I think from there I kind of realised I had more of a taste for the animation side than the live action side. The production workflow is totally different. You're working a lot with art and artists, and that was something that really appealed to me because I did have this artistic side to myself, and I stuck with it with that agency for a little while. And the weather was terrible in Scotland, so I moved to Australia completely on a whim, not with any view to kind of progress my career at all. But I ended up, within my first week I got a job at an animation studio there. And they were great, and they were quite young as well, and they were growing. And there's a bit of a theme here. I kind of join these companies that are starting out and have quite high ambitions, and I really love that because I think it's a great place to learn and be really scrappy. And I think from a producer's point of view, you learn so much more. You're at the coalface with the client, you're dealing with maybe smaller budgets, you're figuring out creative solutions because it's not all worked out. It was a huge learning curve for me. And I think I quite quickly sort of positioned myself, or it just became apparent that I was quite good at the kind of client relationship side of things. And I was elevated quite quickly, and I became senior producer and then kind of EPing there. And I wanted to kind of travel around a little bit around Australia. So I left from Melbourne to Sydney, and they said, hey, do you want to open up a Sydney office for us? We'd love to have a branch there. Try it out, EP, see how you go. And I did that, and I had no contacts and no friends or family in Sydney, and I was kind of starting all over again. And it was really successful. I mean, I made 7 figures in the first like 6 months. So, it was going quite well. So they were happy. And I decided that we'd been away from home at that point for quite some time. And my then boyfriend, my husband, and I wanted to come back to the UK. I wasn't quite ready to go back to Scotland. So we decided to move to London. And I was lucky enough that the company I was working for said, why don't we take this company international? Do you want to set up a studio for us in London? So I did that. And again, started from scratch and got everything set up, office, computers, a whole creative team from scratch, and did that for about 4 or 5 years. And I was head of production, but really, I suppose when it's such a small kind of team, you're got so many fingers in different pies, and you're kind of HR, and you're kind of someone's emotional support when things aren't going great, and you're also a producer. So I did that, and then from there, I think I'd spent quite a bit of time with that company, and I wanted a new challenge. I moved on to quite a bigger company called Nexus Animation. Anyone that works in animation might have heard of them. They're based here in London, and I EP'd there and just stayed on the EP path, and have since been at Passion as MD EP, and now I'm at The Line, which is a lovely 2D, 3D studio, mostly 2D, in London, doing EP here. And it's been a bit wiggly, I think I've moved around a bit.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an interesting sort of story, and an interesting point where you mentioned you had that kind of entrepreneurial side, which definitely seems has been useful along that path of, particularly when you were at Joomla there, as you say, and you were able to kind of almost set those international or other locations up. Have you ever had the inkling to, along that path, to sort of say, maybe I'll set my own studio up? Has that ever been a consideration?
God, it's been talked about many a night over some wine or some beer. I think it's my husband's number one frustration that I haven't done it so far in the most loving and kind way ever. I think when you do something for somebody else over and over again, and I have, I've been at the helm of someone else's company and grown it, and you see the success that it has, and you realise, especially for Joomla, where like the HQ was in Australia, but we were very separate. There was no sort of like, I was kind of left to my own devices and given a lot of autonomy, which was great for me. It was huge learning, massive, massive learning. And I realised that I was solving all these business problems when everyone left. If I was thinking, okay, right, we don't actually have a project coming in at that time, and I've got to pay everyone's wages, and how do I solve that? And who can I reach back out to, or what else can we do to make us more profitable? And it always felt like I was kind of carrying that weight and burden for somebody else. And I think, if I'm being really honest with you, the reason I never done it at that point was I was scared. I didn't think I knew enough. I didn't think I knew enough people. I think when I moved to London, I was so excited at the prospect of doing this for someone else, and actually the people I ended up employing were all in it with us, and it was like a little team of like, we're going to make this work. But I also realised that I've stayed in touch with all of those people, and we all sort of recognised what we had there. And I think that was independent to that brand. I think it was that we had a really good working relationship and that we really gelled as a group. Um, so it's probably over the years I've realised the more businesses that I've worked in and the bit more experience I've got, that no one really knows what they're doing. Nobody really needs to have the contacts or have that business degree that I never stuck with, or have even a little black book of people who phone up. It's just hard graft. And if you've got the passion for it and the energy for it, then I think a lot of people can make a success of it. So I'm probably much more now in the headspace of I think I could and I would be tempted than I've ever been before. And I think it's just getting a little bit older and a little bit wiser, and maybe that imposter syndrome's kind of gone in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
That's interesting.
not any imminent plans, of course. I love where I am right now.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's interesting as well with the the experience that you would pick up. I had the kind of opposite journey where I didn't have any experience at all in even in the industry I was wanting to set up in, and I just kind of winged it for about 10 years, and then then figured it out.
I kind of love that, though. I love that. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
I think I think my view of it's totally changed. If you said to me when I was a student, like even when I was telling you when I was like at university and doing all this extra stuff, and media degree is one of those ones that people sometimes do when they're not necessarily sure what they want to be when they grow up. And I'm not being disparaging about it at all because I did it and I loved it. Um, and there's so many people that came through that degree that never went into anything creative, or they couldn't find the opportunities. They're so thin, or they were thin on the ground back then, because it was quite a while ago now. And I was so like ambitious from a really young age. I was really focused, and I sort of like had a determination. I don't really know if I've got that kind of frenetic energy as much as I had when I was younger, and as much as I'm okay with not having all the answers. I'm okay with not being perfect at everything. I'm okay with, like, as you say, winging it and making mistakes and being like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, I was never like that as a younger person. And I think that's the fortune that comes with a little bit of age, but also you've done something and you didn't fail. And hey, you kind of need to like be in it, to try and see if it works. So I think fear of failure keeps people back a lot at the time. And I count
yeah.
myself in that. I think when I was younger, I probably didn't take some of those other steps because I was so scared that I wouldn't, make it or whatever. And it was nonsense, really. So I think you're a good example of just trying.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's almost like in hindsight, and whether you're starting your own thing or if it's career based, it's you kind of look back and you think, oh, I should have just focused more on enjoying the journey rather than
Yeah.
because I was the same. I was so focused and like this
Mm.
is what I want to do. This is where we want to be. And it's interesting that you say there. Do you find that younger people coming into your industry these days lack that focus? I mean, I find that sometimes in the sound side that, when I think back to, maybe when we were trying to break into the industry, you do anything. I mean, you try so hard and to get, just a foot in the door.
Hmm.
But I find with some younger people coming into the industry now, I mean, younger may sound like an old guy, but
We're getting to that age now where we do say younger people because it's
yeah,
like, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
yeah,
I think, you know what, I've spoken about this a lot amongst friends and things, and I don't think I've got a fully fleshed out firm opinion on it because I kind of feel like I can see both sides of the coin. When I was younger and I was trying to make it, I mean, so I moved to Australia, I don't know anything, I wing it, and it's successful. I moved to London, I do the same thing. And I met so many people, maybe around 50-ish, which isn't old. They're just experienced and they've been doing it maybe for 20, 30 years. And I got the narrative of like, well, in my day, you had to, it was cool to work all night, all nighters over the weekend, lots of work hard, play hard mentality. Young people don't know how easy they've got it. And I know I felt that kind of like, I'm working really hard and I'm trying really hard and I've put myself out there. So I know that energy of like, I'm trying my best here. But I also know that like the time that we're in right now, it's probably the hardest economic time for this generation to maybe have some of the things that our parents maybe enjoyed or our grandparents enjoyed in terms of ease of buying property. It's just a really different time. They're not comparable. So I can kind of understand this apathy that some other people have got where they're like, well, I'm never going to be able, it's not about how hard I work. I'm not going to actually be able to achieve some of those things that
Yeah.
my grandparents did when they were 25 because it's just a different landscape. I think when it comes to the creative industries, this isn't going to change. It's hugely competitive. And unfortunately, it can be, largely about nepotism. And I was one of the first people in my family to go to university. Nobody in my family works in the creative industries. I'm from a proudly working class family who really gave me a lot of life skills that I think probably got me to where I am today in terms of confidence, putting yourself out there, really going for it. You can be anything you want to be. But I was probably in the right place at the right time, like there could have been another version of this where I stuck with a business degree and I was doing, I don't know, probably doing business law or something now and like absolutely hating my life. But I think I was lucky. And that's maybe why now I care so much about maybe encouraging people to not be so apathetic. Don't be so shy to put yourself out there. No, it's not okay for someone to take the piss out you and get you to do loads of work for free or not value you. But don't be closed to that opportunity where someone says, "Hey, you free on Saturday? Do you want to come and watch what I'm doing?" Because you might find it interesting, and I think that those little moments are important for people to just take the opportunity. You lose nothing. Try it,
Yeah.
see how you feel. Yeah, I do kind of worry that we're kind of seeing a younger generation sort of like feeling kind of a little bit like, I don't know, why should I have to? Maybe a little bit, or like, and I get it. I get it. It's tough financially, but I do think the more things you say yes to, chances are it often leads on to something else, or you meet somebody and those connections come back at some point in your life. So
Yeah.
be open minded, I think.
And is it something that the line, for example, where you are just now, is that something that that studio is involved in terms of nurturing and bringing through talent? And it's just something we hear quite a lot, and especially in this podcast, speaking to a lot of people in the animation industry, it seems like it's a really important topic, particularly in the UK, because I suppose over the recent years we've been seeing maybe education facilities in France, for example, bringing through talent that's really high level. So it seems like the animation industry in the UK in the recent years has really been sort of banding together and trying to work hard to sort of bring that talent through. Is that something that you're kind of
100%.
involved with?
Yeah, I think the lines, so the whole sort of genesis of the line was that the six founders that own it are still, five of which are still directing on the tools every day, and they themselves were animators who'd worked in the industry for 10 or so years in different places, either in advertising, on feature films, working at some of the companies I've worked at as just artists. And they decided to set up the company together 10 years ago because they kind of found that when you work as part of a bigger production company, sometimes the budgets get, the cream's taken off the top for senior management. You're maybe getting crushed on the creative. You're not getting to make the things that you're really passionate about. You don't really have much autonomy and say in like, what you're putting out there in terms of content. But also the working culture wasn't great either. So this whole idea of sort of overworking or for really kind of rotten budgets or not getting a credit at the end of it, not giving everybody some sort of recognition at the end of a project, that just didn't sit well with the guys. So when they started the line, I think something that's been at the core of it continuously has been, how can we elevate the animation industry in the UK and make sure that there's proper training and funding coming into the UK. I mean, you talk about France, who've got amazing tax relief for doing the arts, and we don't, and it's really bad. And that's why you see some of those projects going to other countries, and it's a bit shameful, I think, UK wide, that we don't fund something that's intrinsic to culture, something that brings a lot of money to the UK. And we're not necessarily encouraging people to stick with some of these creative careers. I mean, I myself, wanted to go to art school, but thought, what will I do for money? I mean, we don't tell kids at school that there's a creative, viable, you can make money doing the thing that you really love. And I think sometimes we pinch ourselves when we go, hey, we get to make really cool content that we're really passionate about, and we can pay the bills. And along with that, I think they are very committed as a company of bringing in new talent from all over the world. It doesn't just need to be UK based, as in born and bred in the UK. If you're talented, they'll find a way to try and keep you and bring you here. But like a lot of the people we have are quite junior, and they've stayed with us. Maybe it's their first job at a studio. And we're seeing this massive progression, and now a couple of them have gone on to be directors and managing huge budgets and clients, and I'm just flabbergasted by that, because I've worked at maybe some other bigger companies where the directors are 30 years into their career, they've got a certain way of working, they're maybe not as flexible, maybe there's egos. Maybe there's some other things going on there that's kind of linked to the golden age of animation and advertising. And I just think we're in a different time now. And yeah, I feel really proud to be part of a company that has those values, because this is kind of the next generation of content. I mean, those other directors have brought us amazing films over the years, but new cycles come, right?
Yeah,
New people
yeah,
come into the fore. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, no, that's interesting. In terms of your kind of job, so I'm always interested the executive producer position.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of give us some sort of insight into what that role actually is? And because it sounds to me like it's a little bit of high level project management, but also a lot of business development. Yeah, kind of talk us through what a sort of I guess a typical day in your life is.
Sure. The one thing I would say is it's actually different in every single company. So the amount of interviews or conversations I've had where someone says, what kind of EP are you? Because sometimes EPs are strictly new business development, go out and do lots of client nurturing or maybe go to some events and things. I myself, because I come from a production background and having been head of production, but also managed projects from the beginning to the end, I would say my day-to-day here is about working with our head of production to solve problems that maybe when something arises that we didn't plan for, it's another voice, another person with that kind of a level of experience to work it out with. I also, at the line, we're quite a small company. We're about 40 people at the moment, full time, and then we scale up in terms of crew. But there isn't another EP on the commercial side, so I do actually have this kind of hybrid role where I help out on the productions if problems arise, but I do handle all new business that comes in and kind of help vet it and understand if it's the right fit for us from a brand perspective and budget and all that kind of thing. But I also kind of foray into maybe some of those MD responsibilities as well, because I've got full control over the commercial side. So again, the business side of what I've done in the past comes in when I'm looking at strategically what the next move for the company might be in terms of commercials. How do we respond to market changes? What other territories do we want to be working in? How are we nurturing that? Working with our agents in other countries to help nurture our brand presence abroad. Maybe it's about going out to certain events and also doing sales trips where you go and chat to clients and take them for dinner, the usual. and also thinking about the profitability of the commercial department as a whole. So just making sure that we're setting ourselves up to be robust and viable, and working with all the heads of departments so that we can respond to changes and also grow in the right direction. I think the line is very conservative in a good way, and very conscious of growing at a really sustainable, gentle rate. I don't think the line ever wants to be 300 people strong. I mean, hey, come back to me in 10 years' time, that might have changed. But for the time being, all those things about nurturing young talent, growing the community here in the UK, making sure we do excellent work. I think there's really a feeling that if we got too big, maybe some of that would go, and you'd maybe end up doing things that you don't maybe want to do, but they pay the bills, and that's not a space that the line wants to be in. So my job is kind of working with the partners on that. How do we maintain what we've got whilst also nurturing the team that we have, and that kind of thing. So it might be different for someone else as an EP in another production company, and certainly in previous roles it's looked a little bit different too. But I think that's when you work for smaller businesses, you end up kind of foraying into other territories or other departments because you've got experience there, and that's the great thing about working in a smaller company, I think, because there's a bit more freedom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting point. We've been having these conversations recently. In our line of work, I guess a big studio would look quite small to other areas. I think our biggest competitor is probably about I don't know 15, 20 odd people. So yeah, we've been kind of having those conversations recently where in being kind of ambitious and competitive, I guess, to a certain level. I've always kind of thought it'd be good to sort of push on and get to that level. But we've been kind of building our advisory board and stuff like that, and the general consensus has been, well, you don't want to get to a point where you're so big that you're just feeding the beast all the time, and you're taking on projects that don't make sense, and that's been a real kind of eye opener, I think, for me, as well, because we've seen projects where we've literally said, look, we would love to work on this with you, but we just can't. We just can't make the budget work, and then we see that same project being advertised a year later by our biggest competitor, and you're like, that's interesting. So they're just taking on things just to keep that beast fed. So it's a great point. So I was going to ask you, how do you then? You sort of mentioned there, obviously lots of different aspects of that role. How do you vet projects when they come in? What's your kind of process there? What is it that you're looking for in terms of a project that's a good fit for the studio?
Yeah, I mean, so this changes in every company, but here at the line, I set out a strategy with the partners, which involved like going through, I think we did maybe about 8 or 10 different sessions with all 6 of them, and understanding. I mean, having a company owned by 6 people equally as well, it's really interesting because they're not the same person. So just understanding each of their creative interests and what matters to them. So at the line, the things that matter to us is doing something that we think could be creatively exceptional. And in that, it's probably a client that we think we'll be able to have creative freedom with. So unlike maybe some of the other companies I've worked at where there's a lot of advertising work, I'd say the majority of our work's with direct clients or games clients. It's not exclusive. That mix changes depending how busy we are. But what we get with a lot of the games clients is we're working with an art team who really understand art, who really understand animation, whose feedback is really clear, but they also know the work of the line so intimately. They've maybe followed the work of the line for years or wanted to work with our art teams, that they kind of give us carte blanche to do whatever we want. And I really can't overstate that enough. It's such like an unusual thing to come into a company where I work with 6 really bold, brave people who are like, unless we get to do what we want, we don't do it. And it's the most bizarre thing because I don't think I've ever had it before in my career. And at first I was sort of like, that'll never work, but it does because they're so sure about the kind of content that they want to make. So for me, vetting projects can be quite simply, the script to me sounds quite creative, but it's maybe with a client who we can see the opportunity to work with them like from the ground up potentially. Maybe they don't have a solid script, but that's okay because we get to write it. Or maybe their style isn't quite fixed, but they're really open to hearing us like pitching out what we think is going to work best. So we do a lot of work like that where the game's either new or it's an IP that already exists, but the art team is like quite big fans of our work. And then I guess we've got like values as a company of things that we don't touch, maybe because there's personal views on that, and that might be certain brands, or even maybe through my experience, I know certain agencies or certain creative teams that maybe you're making up the numbers. So I think my experience having worked at other production companies is I kind of know how everyone else pitches now, which,
Yeah.
because I've worked with all their directors, and it's something that you develop an instinct for. Okay, if this person's going to be in the mix, we might struggle to get in on this because it's on their reel and we maybe don't have such a strong example of that. So how can we make sure that we position ourselves in the right way? And it's just being strategic. But I think for us, it's about, could we do something new and super creative? And if there's not an opportunity to do something like a new technique or look that's not already like what we're known for, I think that's really important too. I think we don't want to become sort of like typecast as the action anime people. I think if there's an opportunity in there, the guys are quite up for discussing it. And then budget comes into it too, and timelines. I mean, you do your due diligence and think that's just not realistic for the time and money. But to your point about that reflection you guys are in right now, and that I would say every company I've worked at so far has had this exact moment. It is not a unique business thing at all. It's not just your company. It's every company have this conversation. And I've had it at all those bigger ones too. We've now got to a certain position, how do we maintain the bits that we like? And ultimately, I think if you've got quite a small company, and as much as you don't have 300 staff at the moment, now's the time to sort of like really make that decision because it will run away from you. I think like being creatively discerning, being fussy and being really fucking brave with being fussy, because it's easy to get sucked into the what if the next thing doesn't come in, or what if our competitor's doing it, and you think, well, who cares?
Yeah.
What are we doing? And I think that's the thing, is having the confidence to think, I don't want to be doing that kind of work. Just be brave. So I think we are quite brave here, and that serves us well.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. Definitely a great takeaway because you can, yeah, I suppose, as you say, every business gets to a point where they have to start, or at least they start experimenting with saying no
Mm.
to some things, and it can be like, oh my god, I just said no to work, and then you do see it pop up, and you're like, oh no, somebody else is doing it, but it's so true. If you just think, well, who cares? Good luck to them. What is it that we want to, what do we want to be known for? And um, yeah, it's a great point.
And I think like you end up kind of becoming that studio that say yes to that stuff.
Yeah,
And you don't want to do that either. It's like when someone compares any company to another, they're not apples for apples. There is no other Stephen, there is no other Laura, there is no other these founders. Everyone's kind of doing it at their own rate of success and growth. Everyone's got different, some have got seed funding, some don't have any funding, some have got shareholders that they've got to answer to, some don't. So you kind of can't start thinking, I want to be like them. You kind of just have to be like, well, we're really sure of who we are, and
yeah,
we like who we are, and it's kind of a hill we're willing to die on. I mean, hopefully you never do die on it, but it's just having that integrity and I think on a personal level, that's really important to me. And that's probably why I
Yeah.
like working here so much, is that I've been in situations where I've kind of been strongly encouraged to work on things. And I think I never want anyone to know that I've worked on this, whether that's an ethical reason or creatively it's really bad. I just think this so doesn't align with like who I am. Like if I told my pals in the pub, they'd be like, "You worked with who?" And I'd be like, "I know, I'm so embarrassed." And that's what happens when you work at some of these bigger companies. They start to entertain conversations because it's about the bottom line, and they're really bloated, and they have high salaries and lots of people to pay, and they don't like it, but they accept it as a necessary evil. And I think I'm quite lucky being at a smaller company where they get to be a little bit more discerning about that. And that's just the luxury that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. And how much do you think it's based on the personalities and the people versus the work? Because I think the line's a great example of the brand of the line and the animation style and the quality of the work. I mean, everybody knows the quality level and the coolness of the stuff that the line do. So if you are sort of strategically pitching on projects, how much do you think, or just generally business development, how much do you think it is values placed in the people versus the portfolio?
It's a great question. I think for the line, it's a huge part of it. I really do. So unlike maybe some other production companies that are director led, where they have like a really big roster of around between 20 and 30 directors, sometimes more. When you're EPing there, your job is to look at a brief and think about, sometimes a certain director is requested because the work is known and that's the ideal scenario. But sometimes an agency or a client might sort of say, who do you think's right? And you're going through your head like this all the time. Who's available? Who might be a good fit personality wise, creatively? Who will like this brand? Who do I think could win against the competitors? Who do I think will get excited and get the client excited? And that's a really kind of tricky thing, because once you say it's this person, and if they don't like it, then it could go. It could be like, well, you're not the one, never mind. And you're like, oh God, we never got that person a job or whatever. But here at the line, because it's kind of like a creative studio model where, yes, we do have 8 directors and some of them are the co-founders. But when a project comes in, they kind of all collaborate on it. Sometimes it's like very obvious that maybe tonally it's right for one person because of like what they're interested in on an individual basis. But I think the reason people really like the line's work is it feels like holistically like there's a tone of voice there across all of the work that feels really authentic to us. And I think that we kind of don't really engage if we don't get that feeling of like you're really into our work. Like a question sometimes I ask is, why us? Like, what do you like about us? And if somebody can't really answer what they like about us, I'm kind of like, it's kind of like going on a date. And they're like, well, I was swiping and you were there, like you wouldn't
Yeah,
stick on a date with someone, would you? You'd be like, we're not really going to get on here. I think you kind of want to feel like that person's taking the time to understand what you're about. And there's scenarios where we've not even had to pitch. Someone's just come to us and said, we love the line, we've got money, do you guys want to do something? And that I've never had that anywhere else. I just think that's absolutely bonkers. And I think that that's because we've got such a community of people online that follow our work and that interact with our work. And it's quite a unique thing, I think. I think, when your co-founders are makers, they're not business people,
yeah,
they're really smart guys, but they never started this to be millionaires or to, stack them high and sell them cheap. All they wanted to do was make really good work. So if they can feel proud at the end of the day of the stuff that they're putting out, they think they've done a good job. And they just so happen to be really good at it and really likable. So it's like the perfect mix. I think personality is huge for us. I think we find that our clients really love us. We actually, if we deliver a film, we quite often travel out to watch the premiere with them. We were out at Gamescom. We launched something for Marvel Snap. We went out to Germany and met up with our colleagues who we've been working with in the States. We went to Vegas to launch another film. We heavily invest in those relationships because they've kind of been part of our journey. And when we make something, we care about it just as much as them. You know, it's not just another piece for the reel. It's like our community goes nuts for it. It gets millions of views, you know. So it's important to us to do a really good job. And the personality, I think, is huge for us.
Yeah, it's a great point. We used to before the pandemic, we used to make a point of flying out or going to wherever we were recording a project. So
Mm-hmm.
Glasgow's our kind of management hub, but we do most of the recording maybe in London or in LA. And we used to make myself and Phil, my business partner, used to make a point of flying out to LA, for example, and just being in the studio for that first day of recording.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we had to do anything, but it was just kind of showing the client that we're just going to come here just to make sure that everything is kind of going the way we want it to go. And I think that level, like you're saying there, going out to be with the client for the premiere and stuff like that, it's
Mm-hmm.
so appreciated, I think, isn't it? From their point of view of like, wow, this, they really care about it, and this is the effort that they're going to.
100%. I mean, like we spend maybe 8, 9 months working on an animation. You know, we do quite kind of meaty, complex, really intricate animation, and the lead times can be quite long. And I think that you spend so much time with these clients that you kind of feel like you've overcome something together, you know, and it's the best feeling when you deliver it. And I also think relationships are key. Like, you know, people are just human beings at the end of the day. We're all, yeah, we do this because we love it. But these are people that, you know, you can have connections with way beyond the delivery of that project. And maybe they'll remember you when they go to their next home, wherever that might be, or recommend you to somebody who's saying, hey, have you ever worked with these guys? So I think it's worth investing in if you can afford to do it, for sure. Especially as a small company, because I think you kind of want to have you want everyone within the company to have a personality. You don't want to be kind
Yeah,
of anonymous, I think.
yeah, that's right. It's almost kind of like that. A lot business gurus and stuff will say, "Oh, customer service is a given. You should never consider that to be like your unique selling point." And I totally disagree with that. I think
Mm,
and again, it's from like a sound perspective. I mean, what we do, voice casting and production, for example, for a game, all the companies that do that, we all use the same agents, we all use the same actors, we all use the same editors. Our studios are all built by the same the same people these days, and it's the only thing that the real difference is the people that they work with. So I just know that our main voice director is the best there is. In terms of like somebody to work with.
mm,
Um, and it's like our producers. The level that they go to in terms of like building relationships and communication and stuff like that. I think it's so important.
mm,
And then there is that kind of after sales aspect of the difference between just a job being done and then we need to get the next thing in versus the job's done, but we're so invested in this. We want to see we want to see how well it does. We want to we want to share that success with the client, kind of thing.
mm, yeah.
Um, no, I mean, it's a great point. So I was going to touch upon the kind of specific kind of problems and pain points. So I mentioned before we started recording that with this podcast, we're trying to get some actionable takeaways for other people who are in a similar kind of role to the guests. So what are the kind of main sort of problems and pain points that you face, on a project by project basis, and potentially share some kind of solutions around that as well?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think they can be the challenges that I think I face as an EP are almost like quite specific to every company that I've worked at. I think every company sort of got its own Achilles heel. So sometimes it can be the talent's not quite right for the market at the moment, that you're maybe struggling to get in on certain kind of jobs because you've just not quite got the right person to take those projects forward, or it could be a resourcing thing. I think broadly speaking, a challenge that most EPs will be facing at the moment, and most production or creative companies, is budgets changing and the landscape changing quite a lot, because there was this moment in animation during COVID where we did exceptionally well, and I think most production companies all benefited from that, largely speaking. I think the pivot from live action to animation was a game changer for agencies or clients understanding what animation can do. But post that, I think that maybe everyone got a little bit excited and thought, this is it, guys. But actually, the slog to now maybe get some of those jobs again is back, and I think that we're in a recession, and it's affecting. It's slow, but it's affecting budgets massively. So a big challenge at the moment is, how do we still make really great content for potentially a smaller budget than we've ever been asked to make it for before? And there's a few solutions to that. There's obviously, you can think about working with, different partners at different points of your workflow, if it makes sense for your company to do that, and find economies and efficiencies. I personally think there's a moment that we're in right now to be quite inventive and innovative with new technology, and also maybe encouraging, and this is a big thing, it's no small task, but encouraging the creative industries to, be problem solvers, and maybe, this relationship with agencies where everything's super buttoned down and an account manager sold through an idea to a client that's completely unreasonable and just undoable. How can we start to maybe help people nurture ideas in a way that feel a little bit more realistic? So a lot of the work that we do at The Line is, again, this is a bit of a luxury, and I'm not saying everybody can do this, but we really try and develop relationships with folks who we feel we can help them get to an idea that we think is actually achievable within their time and budget, without closing the conversation of like, can't be done. I think there's a lot of companies that sort of just shut the door, aren't helpful, and I think there's room to still do highly creative work, even if the budgets are a bit challenged. So I would really encourage people to be creative problem solvers, and encourage their producers to be creative producers as well. Start to think about ways that we can tell these stories that allow us to still make the work and make something really impactful without completely losing the opportunity. I also think looking towards maybe a little bit outside the box of how content's being made at the moment. I think maybe some production companies aren't quite prepared for the next generation of content and how people consume content. I think for me, multiverse and Web3 isn't going to go anywhere. It might have been slower than people thought, or it felt like there was a bit of there's been a lot of negative rhetoric around it, what it might mean for the creative industries. But we here at The Line actually been working with a few Web3 companies, and we've been seeing some really creative opportunities coming out of those conversations, and we're making quite high-end, well-funded work. And I think it's not for everybody, but I do think that people should start to think about how culture is changing and how the new generation of people are consuming content, and being open to those opportunities, because I think the traditional model of advertising and content, the heyday is gone. I really will and truly think that. And I think there's a lot of misinformation, or maybe not enough, people don't understand it. So there's so much taboo around that. And I think the intersection between gaming, branded entertainment, and new technology is a super exciting creative space, which we're all going to be deeply immersed in, if we're not already, playing with some of that stuff. And maybe our generation, maybe that's what we're not the core target audience for that. But that is what my 16-year-old nephew is supremely interested in, and that's quite often the clients are making content for that generation. So I think anyone that's sort of sitting thinking about what's next, budgets are drying up. How do we survive? I think educate yourself, be curious, play, experiment, and maybe if you can afford to do it, invest as well in trialing some of the stuff for yourself, so that you understand the technology, and understand what it means, so that if a client is wanting to play with it, and a lot of big brands are luxury brands, streetwear brands, all household names that we would love to work with, they're all doing it. They're all investing heavily in that Web3 multiverse space. So I'd say jump the bandwagon, personally.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And how do you kind of stay ahead of those market shifts and market trends? What's the for you personally? Is it a case of conferences, for example, or is it just really more a case of keeping your ear to the ground and sort of trying to see what's coming next?
I think I spend a lot of time listening to a lot of culture, subculture podcasts, or read a lot of content. I mean, yeah, I get my daily dose of like campaign and ad age, and I can see what's happening in the traditional space. But I actively participate in trying to immerse myself in content that allows me to see what's coming next, or at least be in the conversation. If I don't understand it, I'm quite lucky here at the line with the co-founders here. They're all quite like future gazing guys who are really interested in what's the edge of like latest technology. So we encourage each other to share like articles or anything that's of interest. And yeah, we either attend conferences which are talking about the next generation, whether it's of AI or VR and AR and all that kind of thing, or if we can't make it personally, we listen into the podcasts or the recordings from it. So it's not to say that I believe everything I read. I think there's a lot of like discourse out there. There's an expert in every what's the next thing. Somebody will have one opinion that totally clashes with someone else's. But I think it's a bit like anything else. If you kind of bury your head and say it's not true, or it's not for me, or it's not what we do, then I think, yeah, the work probably will dry up, and you've got to have a kind of openness and a curiosity about where the world is going and that culture shift. And I think that opinions and perceptions are changing quite rapidly, and it kind of feels like the right time to be open to some of this stuff, because as I said, I think the literature out there and the amount of articles showing that whether it's Louis Vuitton, hiring a new creative director that's Pharrell Williams, and it's all going to be multiverse stuff. I mean, that's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. But it's the world that we live in, and it's no longer sort of like the divide isn't as broad, I don't think, anymore. And if you're interested in like culture and where the world's going, you'd be pretty remiss to like pretend it's not a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I read a lot, and we have lots of conversations, sometimes fueled by some beer in the pub. We have arguments about what AI will do to our industry.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of fear around that. I don't know if you guys. I mean, how are you guys coping with that conversation around?
Yeah. It's yeah, it's kind of up and down. I was talking to a few people about this recently, and I think the biggest threat to us with AI is obviously voice generated AI at the moment, and we are finding that with some games already, studios are sort of saying, yeah, we can we can use AI for the NPC roles, and it's kind of fine. We had a couple of games recently where their creative director or whoever was kind of like, we used AI voices as placeholders as we were working through this, and to be honest, some of them we could have just kept. So I think it's definitely something that we need to keep an eye on. I think the way we look at it, and again thinking about games in particular, I'm sure you experienced this as well. Games are made by people who are just so passionate about games. unlike any other industry I've seen. And it's maybe it's naive, but I think it's almost hard to see humans being replaced in terms of the voice acting. When on something that's telling a story. I think storytelling's in our DNA. We're always going to do it, and I think we want to make that a human experience. We want to make that a collaborative experience. And I think without doubt, there will be loads of indie developers that'll use AI to the max because they maybe don't have the budgets to do otherwise. And then hopefully, as they move up, they'll kind of say, "Well, we want to use real actors and stuff like that now." But what I always kind of say to voice actors is, what I'd be doing just now is focusing most of my efforts on building a personal brand, because I think that's what will happen is, and what we're thinking about is how can we be more creative with our casting, in terms of, can we support the marketing of the game as well as the creative, so can we bring in, we've done things, we've had celebrities obviously in the past to the main role in something, but there's also Twitch influencers and YouTubers who are getting into voice, and so it's like, can you bring your own audience with you, because the client will find that really really valuable for sure. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting time for user generated content, or I suppose what's happening in the Web3 space as well is like decentralization of creativity, which is interesting. And I'm not like wholly against. I mean, I like the idea of people being able to make good content, nice, good content. I mean, again, for us, it's about craft and high quality. So that's never going to change for us at the line. And I think what we're experiencing at the moment is like every generation's gone through some sort of shift in culture where you're like, Facebook will never kick off, it'll never survive, or everyone's had some sort of like hesitation around something new at some point, whether something that touches audiences and creates community. And I think actually now more than ever, to your point about the games industry, it is the most discerning audience. If we make a games trailer for a game, it is actually incredibly difficult to work with these games clients to make sure that we tonally hit the right message, that we feel authentic. And that's what everyone, I think, that the next generation is really caring about, is that authenticity. So I don't really worry about humans being replaced from a creative point of view. I think we want something that feels really thoughtful and curated, and true to the IP, or true to the story, or true to the film. And that's the thing that I think we can retain as we move into this new generation of like technology. How do we create authentic stories, authentic experiences, things that people don't feel that they're just getting some sort of auto-generated thing. That's the scary bit that I don't like the idea of. But I think people are way more switched on to that stuff than we give them credit for. And that's like an advertising problem from day one, right? I think, advertisers since the beginning of time have always wanted to tell stories or sell products to people in an authentic way. And back in the day, that might have been like, some sort of campaign where you see a woman using washing up liquid. Thank God those days are over. Where we're now moving into a space where we're actually really like trying to target very niche audiences. And I think that's a really interesting space because it's actually feeding people more thoughtful content and stories that's right for their community. And why wouldn't we want to tell stories that represent the world that we're in? Because we're not just like one homogenous group of people. So I think any reticence around dipping into these worlds or thinking that, it's too lowbrow or completely way off base. I think we've got to be a bit more savvy and be open to it for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I mean, I could sit and talk to you for ages, Laura, but I'm conscious of your time now. I don't know if you've heard any of our previous episodes, but we always end the podcast with the same question, which is, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would that be? So it could be in terms of career, or it could be personal. It could be both.
I think being really honest, the thing that I care about most is having a positive impact on women progressing in this sector. I sit in a lot of rooms where I'm maybe one of very few women. I've been in lots of other roles and experienced lots of different types of scenarios, and I maybe wasn't always as confident or sure of myself. And I think that I see that and a lot of women in animation and film a lot of the time. I think that I'm really passionate about just connecting people with other women that can help them get a little bit closer to their goals, whether that's in a personal development point of view or getting a foot in the door in animation, and making sure that I guess our teams are a little bit more diverse. And I think we're quite good here at the line, but we've got a long way to go. And I just want to encourage other women to see this as a sort of like viable space for them to be in, whether that's on the production side or the creative side. So I spend a lot of my time either mentoring or being mentor. I've been mentee to a mentor before as well, and I think connecting women to opportunities and the community is really important to me. So if I couldn't be remembered for anything else, it'd be that.
Amazing. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for giving up your time today, Laura, to chat to us. There's been loads of really great information from this episode, and you were worried before we jumped on that you wouldn't have enough information to to share. So it's been
Yeah.
fantastic.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. And hopefully, if anyone wants to do this EP malarkey, they've not been put off. It's quite fun. But love your podcast. I think you're doing a great job as well. And I like listening to everyone else's stories too. So thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Thank you.